Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly by rural leader Day Tucker. Day, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing extremely well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad. And on the other side we have writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you tonight?
I'm good, Kenny, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. Thank you for asking. We start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 744,653 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 718,693 were confirmed negative, 25,960 were positive. There were 465 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and there were 2 new reported deaths of people with positive tests today. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get tested. Of course, we do urge you, if you are showing symptoms, please book a test. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 84 people in hospital last night, 10 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,510. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,902 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 40 since yesterday. And this number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. The NHS in England and Wales today launched their new COVID-19 app, with 100,000 people downloading it in the first few hours. However, some users have experienced problems accessing and using the app, some apparently even downloading the New Zealand app by mistake. Just to remind you, the Scottish app, which is the only one of any use to you if you are in Scotland, is called Protect Scotland, and it's available to download from the App Store or at protect.scot. Travellers from Denmark, Iceland, Slovakia and Curaçao in the Caribbean will be required to quarantine on arrival in Scotland due to significant increases in cases there over recent days. This means anyone arriving from these countries as of 4 a.m. on Saturday the 26th of September is required to self-isolate at home or another specified address for 14 days. And before we go on with the rest of the news, if you'd like to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. As you can see, we'll be flashing some of those up on the screen as we go. But our first story tonight, in Westminster today, Chancellor Rishi Sunak unveiled a support package he said would help fend off mass unemployment in the wake of the new coronavirus restrictions. Mr. Sunak said he knew curbs on everyday freedoms were challenging and that the time had come for the public to live with some element of risk. It is on all of us. We must learn to live with it and live without fear, he said. Sunak's job plan resembles the German Kurzarbeit scheme that provides a government contribution to the wages of employees facing short-time working in companies where business is slow. UK workers will need to work at least a third of their normal hours to qualify for the new job support scheme. Their employer will pay normal wages for those hours, with the government and employer each paying a further 33% of the hours cut back, up to a total of 77% of an employee's normal wage. The Chancellor also announced an extension to the state-backed business loan scheme and a continuation of the reduced VAT rate of 5% for the hospitality sector. So Effie, I think if I could come to you first on this, we've heard for a while, we've been talking about the end of the furlough scheme. This new scheme, this idea that we just have to learn to live with a certain element of risk, that's a fairly challenging message for a lot of people, isn't it?
Well, it's grotesquely romantic. If you have children to feed, or if you have rent to pay or mortgage to pay or bills to pay. I'm not quite sure that I'm understanding what Sunak means by learning to live with risk. It's a very strange rhetoric, and it reminds one of other, at least a student of the Weimar Republic like myself, and I'm sure others watching just now, and yourself as well. It reminds me of very, very strange periods in our history. Learning to live with risk, you can't learn to live with risk if you cannot survive. So this particular package that he has just proposed, I understand, is very limited. It doesn't actually extend itself nowhere near the furlough scheme, which protected, I believe, up to about 250,000 jobs in Scotland. And Katie Forbes has been asking for added fiscal powers to enable her. I understand she does have a plan to target the specific areas in Scotland where help is needed. And these calls have remain unanswered. They continue to refuse them. And it transpires that at least this is a warning from Sunak. He's basically telling us to be ready for a very, very long winter of discontent, whatever that may mean. Interesting thing, of course, as always with the Tories, is it doesn't include them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's certainly easier to live with risk if you are a multimillionaire, as Rishi Sunak is. Kate Forbes, Effie mentioned there, she said today, following our repeated calls for more action to protect jobs, I welcome some of what has been announced by the UK government. However, what the Chancellor has set out today does not go far enough. With only 5 weeks to go until the end of the furlough scheme, excuse me, businesses have already taken difficult decisions and now need greater certainty and more time to plan. We also need more clarity on what this will mean for businesses and people who are not working at present, as over 217,000 people are still on furlough in Scotland. And Day, I mean, one of the businesses that jumped out to me, perhaps it says something about the sort of life I used to lead before the pandemic, was nightclubs, which are still not allowed to open and are now being told, well, there's no support available. This really doesn't help for businesses that still aren't able to open, does it?
No, it doesn't. I just wonder, though, is he talking about learning to live with the risk of COVID, or learning to live with the risk of not having enough money coming in to support your family and feed your family? I'd just like to know what he actually meant by that.
Yeah, I mean, it's even if it's a reference to COVID, then it's still quite an odd way of looking at things. You would think we would be trying to squash the virus, get rid of it as much as possible in the way that countries like New Zealand have tried to do. It's quite odd to suggest that we just have to get used to the fact that it's out there.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. And that is the difference between the rhetoric that comes from the Tories and the rhetoric, the message, I would say, that comes from our own First Minister, where she explains things. And, the risk is the same whether you're down there or up here. But the way it has been explained to us, and is continuously being explained to us, helps us understand why. If you involve people, then they will understand you. If you simply instruct them, then they don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's been kind of a distinction that a lot of people have drawn this week, isn't it, Effie, between the kind of threats of the UK government, this fear-based approach, if you like, whereas the First Minister was talking about coming together as a country, about looking after each other and looking out for each other. That does make a big difference, even just in the way that people approach the pandemic, doesn't it?
Whether one is a subscriber to the, be it S&P or the Scottish independence, the whole Scottish independence debate, or whatever it may be. I would like to absolutely echo what you said. Nicola Sturgeon's message as a personal message, as a message of humanity between a human being to other human beings, was absolutely heartwarming. And beyond that, as they just said, if you explain to people, what you do is you put out their respect, and you make respect the first condition of your relationship with your people, rather than the whole idea, as you said, with threats, and if you don't come into work, you lose your job, but please don't come into work because you might get COVID, and all this stuff. Obviously, this is the most shambolic UK government that we've had, I think, probably, actually probably ever since Henry VIII or something. So, it's very, very hard to find anything at all to compare them with. But I would urge people, whether they do like Nicola Sturgeon personally, or they do like the S&P or not, to go to that message and listen to that message, because we are very much all in this together, in terms of risk, in terms of exposure to health, in terms of what our children and grandchildren are doing. So it's a personal message, and I think it's working with people and getting the message out there of what we need to be doing.
Well, obviously, there are a whole lot of financial issues being thrown up just now. And the SNP has said that the Tories are threatening Scotland's economy and risking a winter of mass redundancies by failing to deliver the investment and powers needed to save jobs. Alison Thewlis MP said Scotland had been treated with contempt after the Tory government scrapped the UK budget without consultation, threatening the Scottish Government's ability to plan for its own budget. The SNP Shadow Chancellor, who has led calls for an extension to the furlough scheme, said the Tories had failed to deliver anywhere near the scale of investment needed to save jobs, and are threatening Scotland's economic recovery by refusing to devolve financial powers. With the Tories also imposing an extreme Brexit at the end of the year, the SNP said the only way to protect Scotland's economy was to become an independent country with full control over economic powers. The latest ONS labour force survey revealed that UK unemployment has risen to 4.1%, and the number of workers in employment has fallen by almost 700,000 since March. Separately, analysis from the Scottish Government shows extending the furlough scheme by 8 months could save around 61,000 jobs in Scotland. And this has been another issue that the Scottish Government just really didn't need this kind of headache. We already saw Kate Forbes having to make a budget at very short notice after the last UK budget was delayed and delayed and delayed. And now there isn't even going to be one this autumn, which leaves the Scottish Government basically in limbo for setting its own budget. How is Scotland expected to cope in this kind of situation?
Well, the short answer is they don't expect Scotland to cope, and it's part of the strategy. If you look back to the hundreds of years, the minute that the Union was formed, Scotland was prevented from trading, and there was all sorts of rules and regulations and new things put in place that prevented Scotland from continuing as an independent, successful nation, making its own way in the world and doing its own trade. And that actually has not really stopped. It's more subtle now. And this latest thing is, the latest subtle way of controlling Scotland and keeping the thumbscrews on us as far as our economy is concerned. We've known for a long time how damaging it is being part of the UK, but it is now becoming so crystal clear that even the most ardent unionist is beginning to look and wonder about it.
And Effie, I mean, on that note, what do you think the political impact is of this? Do you think people in Scotland see this as the UK treating Scotland with contempt? As Day says, do you think even ardent unionists are starting to have some questions about this kind of behaviour?
Anecdotally, I can only offer obviously my own experience. I was talking to a solicitor just a couple of days ago, who's in his 70s, and he's very active in the areas of grouse shooting and all the other weird things that we don't like to talk about, and the Tory, and guess what he said? I mean, I hope I'm not compromising anything. I'm not going to mention any names or anything, but he did say, guess what? I'm going to vote SNP. And it was, I immediately went and told my dad. I said, do you know who I was on the phone to? So, obviously this is a joke, and it doesn't mean that because one specific person said this, but we are seeing this. And even in terms of the polling, Kenny, I believe there was a latest poll that returned, an even larger majority, I believe in the 56 or 57% in favor of independence, and that was only conducted a couple of days ago. So absolutely, whether you be a unionist or a believer in independence, it is clear that at the moment, as things are, the devolution settlement is broken. The vow is broken. The Smith Commission promises are broken. The Edinburgh Agreement is broken. The eternal promise of stay in the UK to safeguard your place in the EU is broken. So, you have to be intellectually quite blind not to see the continual violation of all these promises. And the result is what you said, it's almost like a groundswell at the moment. People that you never thought were going to say the word, that they're saying it. So, obviously that doesn't mean that if you do believe in the independence, in the whole idea of independence, you should give up and simply accept that it's happening, because it is not happening today. So we need to work on this and ensure that it is a good proposition. But at the end of the day, what is happening under the UK umbrella right now is quite calamitous.
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, I'm pretty sure, Effie, that it's okay for you to talk about things the solicitor said to you. I think it's just him that has to keep the secrets. Yeah. But we do move on now. And a further £2.5 billion has been allocated by the Scottish Government in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The autumn budget revision for 2020 to 21 brings the total committed so far to dealing with the pandemic to more than £6.5 billion. The latest allocations include an additional £1.8 billion for health and social care, a further £222 million to support public transport, an extra £190 million for business and the arts, and a £119 million increase for education. They're funded by £2.38 billion of COVID-19 consequentials generated by the UK government's spending, £142 million of Scottish Government savings and the reprioritisation of existing budgets, plus £30 million from reserves. Publishing the ABR today, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes warned that significant budget challenges lie ahead. And I think one of the most interesting things there is the breakdown in where the money's coming from. Now, obviously, we expect a certain amount of consequentials because there are certain things that the English government or the UK government is spending in England that are naturally going to be mirrored in Scotland. But these reserves being run down and the money being reprioritised from other budgets in the Scottish government, it really shows where the Scottish Government is squeezing every penny it can in there. But without borrowing powers, it really does make it very difficult to do anything different, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And Kate Forbes has been talking about this for quite some weeks now and bringing it to the forefront, because the majority of us in Scotland really don't quite understand the limitations that are put on the Scottish Government, and we can blame down at a community level, we blame the local authority. At a higher level, you blame the government when actually it's the local authority. But the money actually is held centrally down in Westminster. And that, if that amount of money isn't coming down the way, filtering down, then, the blame has to go back on them. Just to put something in context, do you know how much the bank bailout was?
Not off the top of my head, no.
850 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put it into context, that so far we're not really helping businesses and people that much. It was very quick to go to the banks, wasn't it, without very much thought.
Yeah, it's quite a comparison to make. I do want to link this to our next story, though, and tens of thousands of jobs will be supported by the Scottish Government's new £24 billion draft infrastructure investment plan. Covering the 5 years from 2021-22 to 2025-26, the plan will help stimulate Scotland's green economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. It includes investment to decarbonise business, industry and buildings, the provision of new health facilities and schools, and support for manufacturing innovation. The plan also places a new emphasis on enhancing and finding new uses for existing infrastructure before embarking on new projects. The draft IIP was unveiled in a statement to the Scottish Parliament today by Infrastructure Secretary Michael Matheson. And Effie, we know that in a recession, one of the best things a government can do is spend money on infrastructure. It's one of the best ways to stimulate a recovery because it creates all sorts of other economic activity and facilitates even more in the future. And yet again, this problem that the Scottish Government has, it has to squeeze this money from an existing current spending budget. It can't borrow to invest. And that really limits what it can do, doesn't it?
Oh, of course it does. And you know the problem is that even if you wanted to extend some of these funds or repurpose some of them, you would always have to have some sort of agreement or authorization as to how you're going to go about it. So you cannot plan long term, and you cannot invest in the areas that you want to invest in. For example, I've got this very long report from the government just come through on what you've just talked about, and it is talking about forestry, it's talking about the full fibre broadband support for businesses and households, but also the 11 billion that's going to cities and towns and villages and rural areas. Now, all of this, given COVID, and possibly the new landscape and the new eco landscape that we may be seeing as a result of COVID, the government could sit down and be looking at a 20, 30 year plan ahead. We are not able to do this as a country because constitutionally we're not a country. We are very much part of a region of a country. So yeah, there are huge limitations, and this news is welcome. They're talking about 45,000 jobs, and obviously decarbonization and all the priorities. But in terms of full independent economic freedom, it isn't.
And Day, on the actual subject of this, what do you think about these priorities of decarbonising business and buildings, building new health facilities and schools, and support for innovation and manufacturing? Do you think those sound like the right kind of priorities for Scotland?
Yes, they do, but why have they not been happening before? I thought these sorts of things were already happening. But we need more of it. And if we're talking about infrastructure, I would like to see our ports given some sort of infrastructure funding so that instead of our goods having to travel all the full length of the UK before they get clogged up at Dover, why can't we have our ports or indeed Prestwick Airport brought in transporting our goods across to whatever country they're going to?
Yeah, there's certainly scope for that. I think a lot of people have been talking about that. Effie, just to come back to you quickly, what do you make of these priorities? I'm interested particularly in the idea of using existing infrastructure rather than moving to build something new first. That's quite an interesting way of doing this thing, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure whether this has been, I read that it is the result of the consultation that was held within Scotland. I don't know if any of this has been the result of lobbying or agreement with the wider UK government or wider UK interests or corporations. Please do fill me in if it is. But in terms of, the ecosystem, I do obviously have some objections. I haven't read the full report, so I could not give you a full opinion on it, Kenny. But in terms of adding to existing, as you say, infrastructure, this could be a very interesting way of going about it, as opposed to starting from scratch and breaching, whatever it may be that the ecosystem is made of. I'm not quite sure. Do we have? Has the full report been published? I believe large items within it are still yet to be published, according to this.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
the report has been published, but I don't know how much detail is in there. I've not had a chance to look at it in any great depth myself.
Okay.
We'll move on just now, though. Excuse me. The SNP has voiced more concerns over the UK's internal market bill after the General Teaching Council for Scotland warned that Westminster's plans could reduce the quality of the teaching profession in Scotland. Chief Executive of the GTC, Ken Muir, told the BBC that our key concern about the bill is the extent to which we ourselves and parents and users of the education system would feel that would be watering down the teaching profession in Scotland. The UK government stated that it was not prepared to accept an exemption for the teaching profession. Effie, I'll come to you on this. For people who aren't quite aware, in Scotland there is a requirement to have a teaching qualification in order to teach in a school in Scotland.
In high
the
school,
same requirement isn't there in England, but the internal market would mean mutual recognition. So
absolutely,
English teachers would be able to teach in Scotland without a qualification. How worried are you when you think about that for your daughter in school?
Well, my daughter has just started high school, and she is receiving an excellent education. So the way it works here for secondary school, for high school, is that each subject that is taught, the teacher is expected to have a qualification in a university degree in the particular subject. Now, there are areas in England where this is not a requirement. And obviously, as you rightly mentioned, the internal market bill will make it compulsory for these teachers, regardless of the specific arrangement in Scotland, to be recruited and accepted within the Scottish education system. This is, I would say, watering down is probably a very polite way of putting it. Is simply, lowering the standards. And as we know, the internal market bill is a lowering of standards in disguise. They say that this is to smooth out the whole picture within the UK and make it very easy for things to flow and services to flow. But that was the case already beforehand, and we never had an issue. This is an attack, obviously, on devolution, but also, I'll tell you what else I'm worried about. 3 of my colleagues at Glasgow University, 2 Germans and a Polish lady, have just decided to pack their bags and go back to Poland, which is very much, again, in that spirit. And they are, all 3 of them, amazing, excellent scientists that the UK and Scotland needs, but they could not hold out any longer. So these are the things that are happening. And these are the things that we will be seeing more of as 2021 becomes a reality with Brexit and what have you. But yeah, in regards to teaching, this is what it is, and I would expand that, and perhaps they could enlighten us in regards to agricultural standards, phytosanitary protections, and all the rest of it.
Well, actually, I had a different question for Day, because Day, you mentioned earlier the active union, and I wonder, the active union, of course, the Kirk, the legal profession and the education profession in Scotland fought very hard to retain their independence from England because they felt that they were better at those things than England was, and yet the Kirk is now the only one that's not under threat from the internal market bill. What do you make of that?
Well, again, I just find it absolutely shocking and appalling. How dare they try and take away the very thing that makes Scotland excellent. You know, we lead the world in so many things, and it's just a dumbing down of everything that is good in Scotland, whether it be the laws or agriculture, where they're trying to bring in regulations that will reduce the quality and the animal welfare standards that we hold dear. Um, I'm just amazed that we're sitting here, and I just wish that we could get on and get independence.
Amongst the farmers that you know, how are they reacting to this internal market bill? Are they concerned?
Yes, they are, belatedly. Certainly the union is concerned, and to its credit, it has fought for quite some time, including the English and Welsh Farmers Union. They have fought against it as well. The period running up to that, where Michael Gove was, making love to them for months and years after 2016, just made my blood boil, because they all seemed to be thinking he was wonderful and they believed every rotten word that came out of his mouth. But now that they've realized that he hasn't been telling the truth, and this is where we're heading, now they're beginning to stand up for themselves and fight.
Well, we move on now to our next story, and Scotland has been formally confirmed as the European co-chair of the Under2 Coalition, a network of more than 200 governments set up to drive climate action across the world. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who will formally hold the role on behalf of the Scottish Government, attended the Coalition's virtual General Assembly falling during New York Climate Week, at which the two-year position was confirmed. The First Minister has also announced £149,000 of funding to help women and young people in the Global South, including support for a Climate Leaders project in Malawi to respond to the climate emergency and engage in international climate action. The First Minister said, "As the world continues to grapple with the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19, our focus is rightly on saving lives and protecting people's jobs. But amid these enormous challenges, the climate emergency has not gone away, far from it. And we remain absolutely committed to a green recovery and to ending Scotland's contribution to climate change by 2045. It is an honour to be asked to serve as European co-chair of the Under2 Coalition. The next 24 months will be a critical time for climate action, with 2020 marking 5 years since the Paris Agreement and November 2021 seeing the rescheduled COP26 take place in Glasgow." Effie, I should probably explain for some of our viewers who maybe don't know, the Under2 Coalition is a collection of national and subnational governments. It includes, for example, California, Washington and Oregon states, but it also includes countries like Paraguay and Uruguay. So there's a number of states around Europe that are part of this, including Catalonia, the Basque Country, Baden-Württemberg in Germany.
Wallonia, I believe.
Wallonia,
in
yeah,
Belgium
indeed.
as well.
So what do you make of, first of all, the First Minister being put in this position?
Well, personally, I'm very aware of Nicola Sturgeon's commitment to green economy, and also over the years through her premiership, but also before that, she had always supported by word and deed the idea of, so she has always been very open to the climate question and then materially supported this. I think it's a great honor, obviously, and I'm sure she spoke great words to that effect. But also, what it demonstrates is that a small country is much more empowered, I think, Kenny, to deal in these emergencies. You mentioned California. Now, we know that California positions itself in a different way compared to some other areas in the United States. They are very aware, they're very climate aware, they have obviously the issue with the fires and everything else. Now, when you are a smaller entity, for example, we have spoken about the Scandinavian countries, but you just said, we both said Wallonia together. Again, you see the importance of a smaller structure trying to affect change. And climate is one of the big areas where corporations and lobbying weighs very, very heavily. And when there is a large country which has a huge amount of corporate interests and whose politicians, let's be honest about this, are compromised to these interests, it becomes incredibly difficult to do anything because the entire structure is just inflexible. So, we are doing a lot. We can do a lot more. I'm going to be boring and just echo Day and say, can we get independent, please?
Day, what do you make of this? Do you think this is a chance for Scotland to really show some global leadership?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're already there, and we're just taking a step further. Globally, Nicola Sturgeon is recognised. I mean, she's won all sorts of awards, and I think Effie's correct. Because we're a small country compared to some of the big ones, but the small countries they find it easier, I think, to be more effective because they're closer to their people. They listen to the views of people within their country, and they recognize things from people. They recognize the quality of the ideas that come from their constituents and the people living in the country, and they're quite happy to take them on board and give them a try.
Yeah, certainly that closeness to the people, I think, does make a big difference. I wanted to ask as well, Day, the First Minister also announced this £149 million towards a climate project in Malawi. Malawi, of course, has been a special kind of partner of Scotland in recent years. Scotland has really focused its international aid efforts there. Do you think that's an appropriate way for Scotland to approach international aid, to maybe take one or two countries and really focus on them, rather than trying to be a global player in the way that the UK might like to be?
Oh, absolutely. And when you talk about Malawi, I remember seeing a small program about, or was it our school? It was a primary school who talked to the children in Malawi in another primary school, and they started to share ideas. And they created, in Malawi, the children created a way of generating electricity from a photovoltaic panel or something that they had up on the roof of their school. And it was the first time they'd had electricity in that area. Now, that didn't come from the grown-ups. That came from the children in the school talking to the other children, and then the ideas mixing and merging and melting together until they came up with this amazing outcome. Mm-hmm. So, these are the sort of things that a small country can do very well.
Yeah. Effie, I wonder what you make of that idea. We know there are some schools, I know Holyrood here in Glasgow has a partnership with a school in Malawi, and they do an exchange trip like that. Do you think that is something that Scotland should be doing more of? Is that something we can build on, as Day suggests?
Listen, with the way the Foreign Office are going and the way they are repurposing their funding and the proposed merging of the foreign aid is also going to now go ahead, and obviously that's going to take away a lot of that funding. I think this is the only way for Scotland, Kenny. We're not able, obviously, to supply the sort of aid that a huge big country like Germany or like the UK, as it is just now, is able to do. So concentrating on specific countries, but also specific areas. They mentioned the schools partnership, of which I'm aware of. And that can not only obviously bring a huge amount of knowledge and skill to both sides, but also form relationships and bonds between the North Sea and Africa, which would be a fantastic outcome. So yes, I'm all for it, and I think it should be expanded.
Well, we move on now to the United States, where President Trump has declined to say that he will transfer power peacefully in the event he loses the 3rd November election to Democratic rival Joe Biden. When asked the question by a reporter during a White House press briefing today, Trump replied, "We're going to have to see what happens, you know that. I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster." Trump refused to commit when asked again. Get rid of the ballots and you'll have a very peaceful, there won't be a transfer, frankly. There will be a continuation. The ballots are out of control, you know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. It's sometimes difficult to read quotes from Donald Trump because he doesn't really work in sentences. I'm sorry, but it's true. I wonder what you make of this. Now, obviously, he's not going to concede defeat now. He's not going to say, well, of course, I'll let Joe Biden become president, because he's going to say, I'm going to become president. And I think he did try to get that in there when he said there's not going to be a transfer, there's going to be a continuation. But this, he has constantly been saying over the last few months, the ballots can't be trusted, postal ballots can't be trusted. And there's also this voter suppression effort going on in a lot of Republican states. What do you make of this? Do you think this is a serious threat that Donald Trump might somehow try to squat in the White House?
Well, there's two ways of taking it. We do know that he is not really capable of articulating anything with any clarity. So it's quite possible that what he's saying is that he will not give out any information at this point in time until he knows the result. But the way he articulates that is so muddled and strange that people can take an awful lot out of it. And I just think, well, you know, there's two ways to look at it.
And Effie, Donald Trump has talked about 8 more years and 12 more years at some of his rallies. He's kind of tried to put this idea into people's heads. Do you think it is all just bluff and bluster and him kind of basically trolling America, trolling the journalists? Or do you think there is some serious risk here?
You know, Kenny, I did have a suspicion that maybe he did have some sort of mental instability or mental health concern. But having actually listened to the tapes, remind me who it was that took the interview. Was it the man that did the interviews with Nixon? And I
don't have a note of it. Sorry, but
so there was. So he was talking about COVID. So he was talking about COVID. It was in the last couple of weeks.
The Bob Woodward interview.
Yeah, yes.
Bob Woodward. Yeah.
And what was actually quite scary was that Trump was very lucid in these conversations. So it's hard to say that, he's just a bit of a madman. I don't personally think he is a madman. He has a very short attention span, and as you say, a huge inability to form a sentence. But I'm not quite sure that this is to do with his mental state, or whether this is perhaps a strategy to avoid responsibility and basically get what he wants. He is a vile individual, and I say this unreservedly. But let's not forget also the whole idea of Black voter disenfranchisement in the United States and Latino voter disenfranchisement in the United States. Going from ID, and let's also say that Arnold Schwarzenegger, he tweeted that he was going to help, whoever.
Yeah, he said if it was a budget problem, he would help. Yeah,
he would pay for that. So you get these initiatives, but actually institutionally there is a huge big problem. So you've got ID laws, you've got mass purges of voter rolls, you have systemic disenfranchisement of the Black and Hispanic vote in America. So what he's basically basically saying is that I think he's trying to energize his base. I would like to believe that there are systems in place whereby he will be fumigated out of the White House, but he does have support. I think he's headed towards possibly, not a win. He has been informed, he is aware of it, and he's trying to almost like rally his base. It remains to be seen what happens. We're only weeks away, but it's a scary prospect.
Yeah, voting is actually underway, early voting in a lot of states, and also postal voting is already underway. So we will find out at the beginning of November. But we move on now, and packing students into university halls in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic was akin to the situation with cruise ships at the beginning of the pandemic, according to Scottish Green co-leader Patrick Harvie. Speaking at First Minister's Questions today, Mr Harvie noted that bringing people together from far and wide into densely populated accommodation has created the perfect conditions for the spread of the virus. Patrick Harvie said, just weeks into term and we've already seen COVID outbreaks in universities in Edinburgh, St Andrews, Dundee, Aberdeen and now in Glasgow. Over 1,000 students in halls are in self-isolation, and many of these will be first-year students away from home for the first time. My heart goes out to all of them. They need their universities and the Scottish Government to work urgently to provide the support that they need. There is no doubt that this situation is playing a significant role in relighting the fires of the pandemic here in Scotland. And Day, this was something that I think a lot of people predicted, but has perhaps been a bigger issue than maybe we were quite ready for. Do you see any way round this, though, for the universities to have people coming to university but not staying in halls? It's a very difficult one to deal with, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yes, it is difficult now that they've come. But I have to agree with Patrick Harvie. Why could we not have, there's an open university, why could they not adjust? And at least until Christmas or maybe thereafter, let's see how that went in terms of teaching the students. I mean, I know the young man who works with me on the farm, he has managed to get onto the Rural Leadership Programme, which was a most wonderful thing that I did in 2006-07. And we went to Brussels and Westminster and Holyrood, and we met and we had seminars and we were trained and all the rest. Now none of that is going to happen. It's all online. So yes, he's going to miss out on a certain amount. But from the sound of it, the course sounds to be equally innovative and enjoyable. And I think if they can get round it that way, why can the universities not do it?
Yeah, Effie, it's a little bit strange because most university courses are still being delivered online to at least some extent. But I wonder what you make of the people in self-isolation in halls. I mean, people who are away from home for the first time. That's going to take quite a bit of support to help them get through that, isn't it?
Well, let me first of all say that we are delivering at the University of Glasgow. I'm delivering my course online. The Department of Education, as far as I know, it's all being delivered online at least until February of 2021 and beyond. So, yes, you're right. Absolutely. Now, self-isolating in halls must be a nightmare. So the first thing I will say is I wish them luck and strength, because they're going to need it. I've just had an email from Anton Muscatelli, who is the head of our university, the University of Glasgow, to say that there is support at the moment, that it is available. So for people who need it, and they have identified individuals, sadly, there are quite a few who have tested positive, and they are being provided with food and other support. But obviously, as you say, not being in a home environment and having to share some degree of facility, be it, some sort of kitchen or toilet or whatever it may be, is incredibly difficult. So I personally, I don't know how this is done. I know there are teams dedicated to this, but it is the first winter, as it were, our first COVID winter, and Kenny, it's scary. I know the universities are doing all they can, but I think we should have been a little bit more active in foreseeing possibly some of this. So we'll be watching.
Yeah. Well, we move on now to our final story of the evening, and the Scottish Government has now committed more than £350 million to support communities during the coronavirus pandemic. Since March, this funding has enabled councils, charities and community groups to be flexible and respond swiftly to help people impacted economically or socially, including those struggling to access food at the height of the lockdown. The package included over £120 million to tackle food insecurity, with £12.6 million making sure 175,000 children and young people were able to access free school meals over the summer holidays. £22 million of funding was made available through the Third Sector Resilience Fund as part of £80 million allocated to third sector and community organisations. As outlined in the programme for government, £25 million will now be focused on a new community and third sector recovery programme. This will include business support and investment to help organisations adapt to new ways of working and become sustainable as they continue to support people and communities in response to the ongoing impact of the pandemic. Effie, it is sometimes worth just taking a breath to look at what has been done and what the Scottish Government has been able to achieve, as we've said earlier in the show, within quite a narrow window of spending and a fairly narrow flexibility about what it can spend on. It's done quite well in a lot of ways, hasn't it?
I think it's done admirably. And, as we keep on pointing out on this program, and this is echoed, I think, across the any self-conscious individual and media outlet right across the UK and Europe, the Scottish Government, the added concern or headache or issue right now is that they are trying to cooperate and collaborate under the most extreme international emergency, which is a pandemic, with the most lunatic and inflexible and right-wing British government ever known to man. So how they're doing it, I mean, God and the saints know. I have no idea. I will only just point viewers to Nicola Sturgeon's statement. I believe it was last Saturday when she was trying to get a hold of Boris Johnson, and we didn't know whether he was in Italy, whether he was in a private mansion somewhere, whether he was sunbathing somewhere else, and he never actually appeared to make a formal statement, take questions, and appear alongside doctors and scientists to explain what was happening. He has refused to attend COBRA meetings. So the fact that, the Scottish Government are actually able to cooperate, let alone get anything done, is admirable. And I think under the circumstances, as you say, making sure that children in need are not missing out on their meals, people with disability, people with mental health concerns are at least contacted and attended to is huge, is absolutely enormous. And what can I say? I wish them good luck dealing with Boris or whatever's left of him.
And just before we wrap up, the third sector obviously has a big role to play, doesn't it? We've seen some struggling for funding because people are able to give less, and perhaps the costs have gone up to make things work during lockdown. Do you think this is enough from the Scottish Government to help the third sector kind of struggle through this?
I have absolutely no doubt, and as Effie says, that the Scottish Government are giving as much as they are able to give. And don't forget that the third sector, it's not just about money, it's about all the volunteers who come. And, they give of their time to help. I mean, my emails every day, there's something from the third sector in Stirling, and the work that they do is absolutely and truly amazing. One of the things I remember very fondly with the third sector from better times was back in 2014, 12 to 14, when they organised panel discussions about independence because they were the third sector. And I'm looking forward to the time when they will start to get together again and organise some panel discussions for the public to come in and discuss where we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we can move forward and escape this dreadful Westminster government that's destroying our country.
Yeah, I think just the thought of getting together anywhere to do just about anything looks quite appealing right now. But that is just about all we have time for. So thank you very much to Effie Samara and to Day Tucker for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking to both of them. And it's been, thank you to you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in us making shows if we didn't have an audience for them. But to make them, it does cost money. So we do have to ask, if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up there as a supporter. Your £5 a month is the core funding that keeps Broadcasting Scotland going during the pandemic and beyond. So if you're able to help us, then please do. If you're not, we do absolutely understand, and shows will always be free to view online. So don't worry that we're going to cut off your access if you're not paying your license fee. But you can still help us if you follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. If you find our Facebook page and like that, find our YouTube channel and subscribe there. Click the bell icon while you're there as well. You can find us on the Amazon Fire Stick as well if you want to plug that in and get us on the big screen. So do all that and then share the shows around. Let people know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, why you watch the shows, what you get out of it. Because your word of mouth is the best advertising that we can get. And finally, we've talked about this a lot, but we really do need more people to get involved here. I'm actually covering for Gordon today. Gordon had a medical appointment he had to go to. So I have been covering for him tonight. It would be great if we had more people who were able to take over when one of us isn't available. So if you're interested at all in getting in front of the camera or working behind the camera, there's lots of opportunities. So do please get in touch with us if you're interested in that. But that is absolutely all we have time for. I will be back tomorrow, where I'll be talking to Professor Linda Bald from the University of Edinburgh about the pandemic and how it's being managed. But until then, thank you once again to Effie Samara and to Day Tucker. Thank you at home for joining us, and have a great night. Good night.